Welcome to the Living in Clarity podcast. My name is Brandon Fisher. This is Coach Ratner, and today we have special guest Rabbi Baars.
Great to be here.
We're so excited to have you. Today we're going to talk about the 4 great parenting advice that you tell every parent that should know about their kids.
Very good.
But first, I wanted to say that I knew you back in Washington D.C. area, and that you run these amazing seminars. One called Bliss, which is on marriage, which lots of people take. Have been very successful. Unfortunately, a few not so successful, but you did your best, right? And then Think Like a Winner, which is also your motivational. I know you're an annual speaker at the Fortune 500 conference in Arizona every single year. Yeah. And you're also a author, which is one of your big books. It's called Win, which I've read and I have highlighted. And you have a new book coming out, or it's out already, or it's coming
out? The Hidden Books of the Merciless Sharon.
Yes, and so I have that book. I won't loan it to you. I have to read it at my house. But I got to tell you, there's always a few books, Malcolm Gladwell, Charlie Harari, where I highlight it and I write and your book, your latest book, is full of highlights. And actually, Win is full of highlights too. But even your newest book is even more full of highlights.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So tell us.
I think the next one I'll just pre-highlight it.
That is a great idea.
Just publish the highlights.
Put the highlights out.
It's like stain remover. Why don't you just wash your clothes? It's a stain remover.
I've seen a quote on a new book. I forgot which book. It said one of the most highlighted books I've ever read was the quote by like the New York Times or something.
Yeah.
That's how you tell it.
Very good. So these are the 4 great parenting questions, and they're important because every parents according to these 4 questions. Whether you articulate it or not, whether you think about it or not, every parent thinks about in some way, whether it's overt or whether it's just intuitive. Nevertheless, every parents according to these 4 questions, and the answers that they have, again, whether they articulate them or not, dictate how you're going to be a parent. And this isn't just for parenting. Highly recommend this for anyone in the dating scene.
Okay.
Why? Because when you're going on a date, you want to ask your prospective date these 4 questions, because the answers they're going to give are going to tell you an awful lot about who they are and how they think.
Okay, right? That's a good idea.
Very good. I like it.
But I would bet people are going to be embarrassed maybe ask their date this question. Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah, it depends. Depends on the. You got maybe given them. You can say it like this. I heard this podcast, phenomenal podcast, which you have to hear. You have to listen to the Fish and the Coach Show.
It's actually called Living in Clarity now.
Living in Clarity.
Change our name.
Okay, sorry.
I've been too lazy to get new mugs. That's what it comes down to, right? Yeah.
You need my Win book.
Yeah.
So anyway, you heard this great podcast, and they said you should ask these questions on a day. So I'm just doing what they said, and if it doesn't work out and you throw something at me, I'm going to call up Steve Baars and tell him.
Okay.
Very good.
So anyway, there are 4 great parenting questions. Should we go? Okay. The first question is, what is the worst thing your child can ever say to you your entire life? Right? The worst thing your child can ever say to your entire life. Now, every parent thinks about that on some level. Again, whether they articulate it or not, but they have some idea, and you are parenting according to not letting them make that answer. And therefore, a child, on some level, understands that this is what you don't want them to say. Now, King Solomon ruined it for parents because he articulated the bane of every parent's child. He said, stolen waters are sweet.
Okay.
Right? Now, stolen waters are not sweet. Water is not sweet.
No, not at all.
Right? It's the only product in the market that they're able to have such a high markup on their price is bottled water. I mean, it's all like donuts. Like, the government decided everyone should have free donuts, and you have a hole in your wall, and out will pop. It's like a faucet, and I'm totally in for that.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Right? The government, for whatever reason, feels that they're obligated to make sure every home has fresh, clean, safe water.
Right.
So the first guy comes up, I think I'm going to bottle this stuff and sell it. Right? Even though you can get it for free in your house, people are going to buy it. Right? It's like, why don't we do air on top of that?
Well, they'll still air.
They do sell it. They never quite made it like water.
No.
Right?
Right.
So whoever thought of it, I don't know how he came up with the idea, but nevertheless, it's the only product. In fact, Coca-Cola, when you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, the water that they sell, it's called Dansani. or something.
Dasani.
Yeah, is actually the water they use in the Coca-Cola that they sell at a higher price than if you bought a bottle of Coca-Cola and desalinated it and took out the Coca-Cola, you'd have the Dansani cheaper than you have.
No, it's crazy, isn't
Isn't that
it?
crazy? Right? So how does it sell? Because King Solomon said, stolen waters are sweet. In other words, if I stole water out of your tap, it has no appeal to me because I can get it out of my tap. So
Right.
there's no appeal. But if I stole a bottle of water in a store, right, that sells for $1 a bottle, so it's going to taste like $1 bottle of water. And as it increases the value of the taste, the higher the value that I can steal it for. So you sell a bottle of water for $1, it's really appealing. You sell a bottle of water for $10, it now
great.
tastes even better.
It's called perception.
It's all
all
perception. It's all perception. So when you make something inappropriate, it becomes attractive.
Yeah.
So the things that you tell your children not to do or that you don't want them to do, all of a sudden become appealing.
Right.
Oh, that's so good.
Right? So therefore, you've got to be really careful in what you tell your children not to do. Now, there's some parents that make a huge mistake in this, and because they recognize this dynamic, and therefore what they do is they make everything permissible.
Yes.
Right.
I have friends that do that.
And it's a big
Acquaintances.
mistake,
Yeah.
big mistake. Why? Because a child needs to know there are some things you just shouldn't do. Right? It's just, and it's healthy to have this dynamic. It's also healthy to know that because you can't have it and you think it tastes better, when you get it, it's not so great.
Yeah.
In other words, when you open that bottle of water and you drink it, I don't know. I spent $5 on this thing. I can't tell the difference. When I was a kid, they started this bottle of water stuff nonsense started when I was a kid, and so my mother, I remember one time, bought one of these bottled waters, and none of us could tell the difference. But we couldn't really say anything. We thought it did taste a difference. So after a while, I said to my mother, it really tastes the same. She says, "Yeah, I know. I've just been emptying the bottle."
That's so
filling with
good.
tap water."
Wow.
So anyway, so what's the worst thing a child can ever say to a parent their entire lives? Right? You guys want to put your hat in the ring? What's the worst thing a child can ever say to a parent their entire lives?
As a father, I'll let you go first.
The worst thing a parent can say to a child?
No, a child could say to a
Worst thing-
parent.
I would say that, I know the answer.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So
Oh,
you
there's
could.
an answer.
Yeah.
A proper
I know the
answer.
answer.
Yeah, you
I
wanna-
was just thinking, I hate you.
Yeah, no, you see, you
disrespect
didn't quite hear the question properly. Let me rephrase the question. You see, the question wasn't, what's the worst thing your child can ever say to you this week?
Okay, fine.
So, I hate you is sort of like standard
for right now.
fare.
That happens all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, you see,
Thank God that doesn't happen to me, but whatever.
right, but you see, children use words as tools to manipulate their parents. You see, when you take a pickpocket, what do? You send it to prison, right? What does he learn? How to rob banks.
Yeah.
Right?
You learn from other prisoners.
It doesn't have other reasons. You see, we do the same thing. We take a kid, right, and we put them in school. So what's that? That's like prison, right? So they learn from other kids all the techniques how to get their parents, right?
Right.
So they go to school. His bedtime is at 5 o'clock. His friend's bedtime is at 6 o'clock. He says, "How do you get 6 o'clock? I got 5 o'clock. How did you get 6 o'clock?" He says, "I used to have 5 o'clock, but then I told my mother I don't love her anymore." And she was so distraught. She says, "Why not?" Well, because my friends have 6 o'clock bedtime and I have 5 o'clock. So I don't love you anymore. So my mother made me 6 o'clock. That's a little simplistic, but it's not far from what actually happens, right?
It's
I
not.
don't want to turn you off from parenting at all, but that's kind of because children use words. Right, to use words to like get wherever they want. I hate you. Can you take me to the mall? Oh, and $20 would be really nice too.
Right.
So how much do you hate me?
Right.
They use words, right? You follow? But they say those words because they think that's the worst thing you want to hear said. Mm-hmm. Right. So children will punish their parents by not talking to them. Right, because that's they're dealing with what you think is the worst. The worst thing a child can ever say to a parent is, "Don't help me anymore." Right? That's a killer. Right? That's why children who understand in a parent that's really what they want, right, will punish a parent if they feel like they need to ramp it up by not talking to the parent. "I don't want you to help me anymore."
Was that the same as I don't need you?
I don't need you.
Right.
Right? And there's a bit of a paradox in parenting, because on the one hand, we have there's an old joke about, there's two things I worry about when my kids. One is that they'll grow up and they'll still need me, and the other thing is they'll grow up and they won't need me.
Right.
So it's a paradox.
Yeah, it is.
But but the truth is, if you do it in the right way, your children will always need you in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, that's really the worst thing a child can ever. When you understand that and you raise your children according to that's the worst answer, you get a very different product, very different child than if you say, the worst thing you can say is, I hate you. Right? So that's the first question. Okay, we're good for that. Okay, what's the second question? Okay, ready?
Yep.
The second question is, what's the worst thing you can ever say to your child?
Okay, going right back at them.
Right, going right back. Now you gave me that. I'm going to say the worst thing I can possibly say to you. What's the worst thing you can ever say to your kid?
I would say is, I don't care about you.
It's very close. You're on the right track.
Yeah.
You're warm.
And they want boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. What?
Nothing.
Oh.
Wow.
He nailed it, Brandon. You ready to get married and have kids?
All right.
In that order.
It's a shame.
It's a shame.
Yeah, in that
Exactly. So Elie Wiesel said this line based on Mishlei. And he said, the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? That's the worst thing you can say. I was talking to a mother a few days ago. So she said to me, her son doesn't talk to her, right? So she wrote him an email. And she said, I'm just here. I'd love to talk to you about, whenever you have a chance. And he wrote back. He says, I have less than zero, these are exact words, I have a less than zero interest in ever talking to you.
That's horrible.
That's not as bad as the worst thing he could have said.
Right.
Which is?
Nothing.
Nothing. So I said to her, he said, he does want a relationship with you. Because if he didn't want a relationship with you, he wouldn't write back.
Right.
There's probably people
You block her.
You just block her. There's probably people, I know it's very painful, no question about it. I'm not saying, be happy, but it's not, he said there's hope. I gave her hope.
Yeah.
Right? He wants a relationship. Right? There are people you probably know who you don't like very much. Right?
Yeah.
Do you ever go up to them and say, I've got to be honest with you, I don't like you very much?
I don't want to hear from you ever again.
No.
Well, you don't. Right? Why does he bother telling his mother, I don't like you very much? Because he really wants a relationship. He doesn't know. He's confused. He's messed up. And he doesn't know how to do it. So, okay, fine. But there's hope. Right? One day, please God, he'll come around soon. Right? So the worst thing you can ever say to your child is nothing. Now, I was teaching this idea 35, 40 years ago. And when I was living in Los Angeles, and I had a student named Bernie, and it's one of the saddest stories I ever heard. And Bernie, who's 60 then, told me about something he said to his mother 50 years previous. So we're talking about 100 and a long time. So, because 35 years, he was 60, he was 50 years old, right? So it was a long time ago. So he said to me, for 50 years, I said this thing to my mother, and for 50 years, I never understood what I said. And now you explained it to me. So I said, what did you say? So he says, I was playing with my friend Johnny, my best friend Johnny, in Johnny's backyard. And we're in the sandbox. And Johnny's mother comes out and says, Johnny, time for dinner. Come inside. And Johnny turned to me, and all he said was 3. That's all he said. I don't know what he meant, but it wasn't my mother. So we kept on playing. About 5 minutes later, Johnny's mum comes out again, and now she's mad. And she said, Johnny, I told you already, time for dinner. Come inside. Johnny looked at me, and all he said was, that's 2. Keep playing. Right? Okay, about 5 minutes later now, Johnny's mother's coming out, and she's got steam coming out of her ears. She's red hot, and she's mad as anything. And she says, Johnny, you don't come inside, you're getting a spanking, you're going to bed, and you're not getting any dinner. And Johnny turned to me and said, that's 3, I gotta go. Right? Kids know their parents better than anyone else in the world. They know you better than you know you. That's the absolute truth. Right? They know, he knew his mother, right, and what he could push her with. Right? Kids will always push you to the limit. Right? They know exactly how much. You think they're misbehaving. They're more precise than an atomic clock. Right? They engineered you. The reaction they want from you is because they want to hear that reaction. They're not playing around, right? They are playing around, but they're not playing around in that sense. Mm-hmm. So Johnny goes home. So Johnny goes into his mother, and Bernie goes home to his mother. Walks in the back door, opens the back door, and sees his mother making dinner. And he said to her this line that for 50 years he did not understand what he meant. He said, "Ma, how come you never shout at me?"
Oh, like his friend, his friend Johnny.
Yeah. So what was he saying?
He's saying, "You don't care about me."
You don't care about me. Now, he didn't understand what he meant, because ostensibly, you ask your kid, do you really want to get punished? Do you really want a timeout? Do you really want to lose dessert? Do you really want to have these things? Right? Ostensibly, they say no. So why do they misbehave? Children are the only ones who misbehave for attention. Right? Nobody drives 95 miles an hour down your local highway, right, just to talk to a policeman. Yeah. I'm just lonely. Will you talk to me for 5 minutes? Okay, 5 minutes now. This is your ticket, right? Your vote is going to cost you $300, right? They said children misbehave for attention because they need to know you love them more than they care about the punishment. The punishment's worth it for them. That's the price they win to pay. That's why parenting is so frustrating. Because we would rather sit home, read a book, or watch a movie. But they don't want to. They want to know you love them. Yeah. And if you're not exhibiting real love on a deep level to them enough for them, they're going to misbehave. Yeah. Let's see if Daddy loves me. Wow. How come there's sugar in my socks? And they'll do all kinds of things like that, right? Because they want to know. So the worst thing you can ever say to your child, as Brandon correctly pointed out, beautiful, is nothing. There's no response. Therefore, any response is a good response.
Wow.
Right? There's better and worse, but nevertheless, any response. And this is very important in marriage, because very often, right, your kids will trigger your spouse. They'll trigger you too. And the response is not pretty. In other words, if you don't respond in a way that you're ashamed of, you don't love your kids. Right? It's hard
to respond in a way
that you're ashamed of.
That's a negative way.
Right. In other words, why did I lose it? In other words, if you don't lose it with your kids, it's because you don't care about them.
Yeah, but they don't respond well to yelling. The kids don't respond. It's in my family, yelling at kids doesn't do anything.
It doesn't get the result that you want.
No.
But what it does do is it tells them on a deep level, I care about you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, you see, parenting is not sheep herding. You ever see the movie Babe? With the pig.
With the pig.
Right? The pig, and the pig's got to become the sheepdog.
Yeah.
Right, you follow? So when I was growing up in England, sheep herding is a really big thing because the country was built on wall and sheep and everything.
Right.
So you used to watch on the television every Sunday. There was only 3 stations. Or 2.5 stations, and sheep herding was big, and I grew up watching sheep herding.
They watch it on TV.
Oh my goodness, it drive you batty. And when I was a little kid, I didn't know how stupid it was, but it's stupid. I mean, if you're a shepherd, it's important. But the whole trick of a shepherd of sheep herding is to get the dog to move the sheep into the pen with the least amount of errors. Right? And people think parenting is like that.
Yeah.
Like if I get my kids to go to bed when I say so on time, I'm a good parent. No, it has nothing to do with that. In fact, most of parenting is done when you lose it.
Yeah.
If you're not losing it with your kids, they're not going to see how much you care for them by just being calm, right? And therefore, when your spouse loses it, that's a good thing.
Is there a good way to lose it? You mean yelling? Just
whatever it takes.
I stopped yelling. It doesn't do any good anymore. Right. I don't yell anymore.
Whatever it takes. It all depends on the person. Yeah. Like for one person, you look at your kids and they'll freeze. It depends on the parent. It's like how you express your anger, right? Is depend on you.
And they'll pick up on those.
They'll pick up. They look at when you give them that look. They just it depends what it is, right? Some parents, it's like you've got to really, lose it to get angry and everything else. Depends on the parent. But if you don't lose it, you're not doing the right job. The kids are not connected. Okay, so that's the second one. The first question is, what's the worst thing your child can ever say to you? What's the worst thing you can ever say to your child? Right. The third thing is, what's the biggest mistake your child can ever make their entire lives? And this is a really important thing, because parents really think about this one. And they have ideas about what it is. And therefore they're constantly, even a parent who says that drugs is the worst thing, which it isn't, but even a parent who says such a thing now is a dilemma. And therefore they go one or two ways. If I make it totally accessible, make it no big deal, then I've got a shot at them not taking it. Because if you live in America, I don't know what it's like in Israel, but if you live in America, every kid today has access to drugs.
Yes.
The days when you could shelter your children from this stuff is gone. Mm-hmm. So you better know how to deal with this, right? So some parents, they make it available, thinking that that's the way to inoculate your children, right? And it's shown, all kinds of studies show that you take you expose children to drugs, and some people, that's it. Some kids, they're gone, and some kids, it's not a problem. Right? I forget exact numbers, it's in my new book, but I think it's like 95% of all the soldiers from the Vietnam War who were on heroin dropped it when they came back to America.
Wow.
What
percent again?
It's 90,
very
in there, very high. I forget. It's in my book.
Right.
I'm not going to remember numbers, but it's a very high number. Mm-hmm. And there was this delusion that we have that if you take heroin, you're going to become addicted. It's just propaganda. It's complete nonsense. You can take it. I'm not saying you should take it, that's not the point, right? But the fact that just because you took it, or just because your children are exposed to any particular drug or alcohol or anything like that, does not mean that they're going to be addicted, right? Mm-hmm. There are concepts, I know we're going to get way off topic if we get into that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another time. Right?
But that thing, the 10% that can't get off of it, that comes back to America, that's the problem. When you expose 100 kids to drugs,
right.
You might have 10 that can't get off.
Right. So the question is, how do you inoculate your children for drugs? And maybe this will be a theme for another.
Well, this is definitely something we have to talk about.
How do you inoculate from drugs? It's a very important thing. And if you know this, it's very powerful to raise your children with. But we digress, which is my occupational hazard.
Digression.
On my tombstone, they're going to write, "He digressed. He's buried somewhere else." So we're on the question: what's the worst thing that can ever happen? What's the biggest mistake? Biggest mistake.
What I was going to say is like overdose.
Overdose.
Yeah.
Right.
Dying and dying. Overdose and dying. That's like the worst mistake. Is it worse than that? I don't know.
Yes, it's worse
Suicide,
than that.
overdose.
Well, if you don't learn, if you don't figure out what is the worst mistake, that's I won't say inevitable, but it's going. You're running the risk of that happening, right? But that's not the worst, right? What's the worst mistake? The biggest mistake your child will ever make? And this is really, really important. The other questions are also really, really important. So they're all very, really important.
I don't know.
And the fourth one's going to be important.
Yeah, it's going to be important. Right? The biggest mistake your child can ever make their entire life is to not learn from their mistakes.
That's true.
Good.
You see, there's an upper limit of how healthy, if you do your job right, and even if you don't do it so good, there's an upper limit of how high you can raise your children. At a certain point, your children, you've been giving them everything you've got, and now they're on to the next level.
What age do you think that is?
From the moment they're born.
No. I think there comes a point in time in because I have 4 or 5 kids between 10 and 17, where there's a point in time where I can't tell them what to do anymore. I can guide them, I can give them advice, but I can't tell them what to do anymore. And I think that personally, I think the age is 17 years old.
Well, see, if you say tell them what to do anymore, what you can tell your children to do at any time is a very limited meaning.
Right.
The real impact of a parent is not what you tell them. You can tell them not to cross the road.
Right. It's what you do.
Right. What's that?
It's what you do. Not
what you do, or the ideas you put in their head.
Right.
You show them all these things are a great impact. And I've got children now 35. I like to joke. I adopted them when I was 6, and adopted older
You don't have
children.
a child 35?
No, you're right, I don't.
You really?
I think so. Maybe 34, something in that range.
Oh, that blows me away.
I know, tell me about it. So I was sick. I got married very young. I was 6 or 7, something like that. So anyway, and you don't stop.
Yeah, my
and
dad
the
still
and the
definitely
most
tells me what to
meaningful.
do.
What's that?
I said for sure. I'm 29. My dad's still
Yeah.
telling me what to do.
No,
Yeah.
it's not a question of telling me to do, but it's a question
if I
of
listen.
teenagers and early 20s, all the way through to now, are some of the most impactful things you'll ever tell your children.
Yeah.
Right? This is where if you did a good job up until now, you can have the most meaningful impact right now.
Yes.
If your children are listening to you, which is no small thing,
No.
right? And even if they're not listening to you, it's still a very powerful thing to teach your children. So it doesn't stop. So the most so at a certain point though, they're now thinking on their own, right? So if you teach them to learn from their mistakes, then there's no end to how great they can be.
Doesn't that come naturally?
No. Oh, please.
I,
You need to get out more.
so how do you teach them to learn from mistakes?
Oh, that's the killer question. How do you teach them how to learn from their mistakes? Right? And I was imagine for a world, right? It's a fascinating. I talk about this in my book, right? When the Titanic went down, both the British and the Americans had state commissions trying to figure out what went wrong.
Right.
It was the most biggest catastrophe. Right, 1/3 of the boat died. Right, it's a mind-boggling catastrophe. How did such a thing happen? And the answer simply is they just built, as they built boats bigger, they didn't change any of the rules, but the consequences were much more significant. So the fault that was in the small boats really didn't make so much a difference when it's just a paddle boat. But when it's like a Titanic, these faults make a really big difference. So they both had commissions about what went wrong and recommendations. The American Commission came out with all kinds of rules and suggestions about how to build boats, maritime laws, some of which over 100 years later still
Still
in
in existence.
Still in, right?
Especially with ships, like safety ships.
Safety ship.
Yeah.
Right. The British, on the other hand,
Skateboats.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Lifeboats.
Lifeboats, thank you. I couldn't
Right.
come to it.
The British, on the other hand, primarily blamed the iceberg.
It's the iceberg's fault.
It's the iceberg,
Yeah.
which is true.
Technically it
It
is. Yeah.
shouldn't have
Well,
been there.
I mean, listen, who else? The iceberg did it. Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Put the iceberg in jail, right?
They tried looking for it.
Yeah.
It melted.
But really, it was the captain's fault for saying that even God couldn't sink it.
Okay, so now you're going to go into deeper
Yeah.
reasons. You follow? You said, but imagine for a minute that the British had stayed the British, and the British Empire had never fallen, and the British, their commission had stayed. Right, the boats would still be going down.
Right. People would still be dying on boats.
They were
Yeah.
dying on boats.
Yeah.
Right? When was the last time you heard people died in a capsized boat?
I don't know.
Exactly.
It's usually ferries.
It's pretty rare.
Ferries, right?
Ferries and
Right,
storms.
right. It's very, 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 very rare.
Yeah.
Like boats like that don't go down.
No.
Right? Because we love. So if you learn from your mistakes, there's no end to how great you can be.
Right. It's like flying.
Same thing
It's
as
like you
flying.
don't see rarely have accidents
Right.
anymore.
It was I forget the numbers. 3 or 4 years ago, the FAA announced that they didn't. In 1 year, they did not have one fatal error.
That's unbelievable.
It's mind-boggling.
Yes.
When you think how many planes go. Remember, I'm older than you. I know I'm older than you. But when I was a kid, planes were falling out of the sky all the time.
Yes.
Another one, another one. It was
Yeah.
like it was like the Titanic. When the Titanic went down, people were nervous about going on boats
Sure.
because boats went down.
Wow.
I remember the first time I got on the plane after 9/11, and I was flying to Newark. I saw like an Arab, and I was freaking out. It was really hard to fly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, so how do you teach? So Daniel asked a fantastic question. How do you teach your children to learn from their mistakes? There's no simple thing. Never. This is the golden rule. Never lose an opportunity to say you're sorry.
As a parent.
As a person,
As a person.
right? Is that someone's blaming you for anything? The first words out of your mouth are,
I'm wrong.
I'm sorry.
I've done that recently. I apologize.
you don't have anything to apologize for. But even if you don't have anything to apologize for first say I'm sorry. Right? Practice saying I'm sorry. Right? Even if you know you're right. Even
It's
if
hard. It's hard for certain people to apologize. To admit they're wrong.
100%.
And I see this in my social circle or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say where, but like it seems, and I don't have a problem doing it, but it seems like so hard for people to get over the fact that they made a mistake.
That's
And I
right.
try to, and with my kids, I try to get them to, they do something wrong. I say, why don't you just tell me you're sorry and I won't do it again. I made a mistake.
Right.
And I've been
Right.
trying to teach them to say that, you know.
Right.
I'm not mad at them. It's just admit you made a mistake.
Made a mistake. It's
And
very,
then grow
very
from it.
hard.
Yeah.
I used to
That's
work
all.
in hospitality at a hotel, and one of the things, there were two philosophies: apologize and then move forward, or don't apologize and say, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can.
Right.
I
mean,
don't know which one works better, but I always did the I'm sorry one.
That's what
Yeah.
God asked for in the garden.
Right. Right.
Did he? I mean, I don't think he expected Adam to like. I mean, I think all God wanted was him to say, "I made a mistake. I'm sorry."
Yeah.
That's all he wanted, right?
Right. He says to Adam, "Did you eat from the fruit that I told you not to eat?" And what does Adam answer?
Blame my wife.
The woman that you gave me, right, father? That wasn't the question. I wasn't asking you why you. I know why you did it. All I want to know is, did you eat? What's the answer? Yes.
Yeah.
That's all you had to say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I did it. Yes, you're right. It's taken us 5,000 years since then to go, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right? It's an amazing thing. Right? It's the Titanic. We blew it.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult. The Russians, at the same time the Americans were trying to put a man on the moon, the Russians, who had a more advanced technology
Right.
and spaceships, right, were trying to do the same thing. The difference was the Russian program was secret. And they only published their successes when Yuri Gagarin was the first man to fly in space. We don't know if there were other people who didn't make it.
Oh,
we have no
wow.
idea, do we?
We have no idea. There's no
No.
record of it. He could have been the third guy. Uri, you want to give it a shot? Okay, fine. Right, you follow? You said that we don't know. When the Americans did it, it was all public.
Yeah.
So the failures on the Russian side were hidden, and if they just failed so badly, they had to give up the whole program. Right? They gave up because they just kept failing and messing up, and they couldn't admit their mistakes. When the Americans, they had a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And it was very painful. If you read some of the reports and books from NASA, right, it was very, very difficult for them to admit their mistakes because no one likes doing it, but they didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
If we're going to put a man on the moon, the only way to do it, because we don't know how to do it, we have to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
If you learn from the mistakes, there's no, and the technique is to just apologize, because then you get out the way. It's not difficult for us to learn from other people's mistakes. It's easy to learn from other people's mistakes, right? The Titanic, who do you want to learn from? Which commission do you want? The British one or the American one?
Right.
I'll go with the American one. It's not difficult for us,
Yeah.
but not when
Right.
you're involved. It's
Yeah.
very, very
It's
difficult.
difficult.
Teach them how to say sorry, and you'll teach your children to learn from their mistakes. Very, very powerful.
That's real. What you said today, this is the most powerful. Because getting kids to admit they made a mistake and learn from mistakes, they only learn from you. So when you make a mistake and you say, I'm sorry I made a mistake, that teaches them to do it.
That teaches them to do it. Whether it's to you, whether it's to them, so many parents won't admit a mistake to their kids.
I told you he was really good, didn't I? I mean,
Yes.
he's out of control. It's so good.
Right, so when you lose it, say to your kid, I'm really sorry. I overdid it. I lost it. Right? It's a powerful thing. See, parents think that children want you to be perfect, and they do. And if I could make it, I would, but I'm not. So that I can't do perfect. I can only do second best, which is admit your mistakes.
Yeah.
But
Deal.
by denying your mistakes, your children realize you're an idiot. Nothing personal, so my best friends are idiots. But they know you made a mistake. You're not getting anywhere.
Right.
So the best you can do is, listen, I made a mistake. That's very powerful.
That's so real and so practical for every facet of our lives.
Yeah, that's a great question on a date.
Great dating question.
Date, right?
And great thing to do on a date. Apologize if you do make a mistake.
100%. Okay, so we've got the last question. Right?
Yes.
What's the worst thing that can ever happen to your child? That's a killer, right? Right, right, because every parent's thinking like this, and I see parents do this all the time. Wherever they think is the worst thing, running in front of a car, I'm not saying that's a good thing, right, running in front of a car. But what's the worst thing that can ever happen to your child? Right, and kids know what you think is the worst thing. Even if you don't articulate, they know what you're afraid of and what you don't want them to do and what is the worst thing. By knowing what really is the worst thing, You give them a very powerful idea, powerful concept to live by. What's the worst thing that can possibly happen to your child?
They die.
No, it's not the worst thing. It's pretty bad. I wouldn't recommend it. No, it's not the worst thing.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not obviously. Injury or death is really bad.
Yeah.
So, but
losing money on the stock market is really bad too.
Right, but not the same thing. But so this is something that's a little more deeper than that.
Yeah,
So I don't know the answer.
They don't live, meaning that they're alive.
Oh, okay.
And
Now
they're
it's getting warm. Okay, Brandon, you're good.
And I would say not reaching their potential.
Yeah.
That's good too. That's good too. You see,
Wasting their talent.
wasting their talent. Yeah. That's good too. You're on the right track.
Right.
I like that.
Right.
So you see, there used to be a saying. I used to be upset that I didn't have shoes. How's it go? Till I saw someone. I used to be upset.
Oh, no feet. Have no feet.
There's no feet.
Right.
Right? There's a strange human dynamic that goes like this, right? When I see someone suffer worse than me, I feel good.
Right.
Right? You lose 10,000 on the stock market, which I would not recommend. You feel terrible. You call your best friend up, and before you can get the words out, because you want to tell him, if you get some sympathy, he tells you, "Oh, I can't believe what I did. I lost $300,000 on the stock market." Right? You call your wife and you say, "Who's a stock market genius?"
I only lost $10,000.
Right.
Joe, the idiot. How could you lose $300,000? I mean, what crazy nutcase are you? Right? What kind of fool are you? You follow? Is it all of a sudden the same thing? It's not so bad. You follow? Right? What is going on there? Why do we feel better when we see people suffer the worst? And every parent says the same line. "Oh, I don't like the broccoli." Oh, if you're in India, you're eating gravel. Right? So you see, what changed when you didn't have shoes? So when you didn't have feet, what were you thinking? It's a change in thinking. What were you thinking that now you think differently?
Gratitude.
Gratitude, that's true.
Gratitude. So if you have feet, and that's the thing, right?
Right.
And there's something to do with the feet.
Right.
Now I can go do something.
For the worst thing to happen to a child would be not living with gratitude.
That's very true. There's a little slight change on that. You see, what were you thinking is that you were thinking, to be precise, you were thinking you're suffering the worst.
Yes, you think you're the worst. No shoes.
Right?
Your friends all have Adidas's and Nikes and Pumas.
Right. You follow?
Yes.
It's only when you see the guy without feet, you go, "Oh, I'm not suffering the worst."
Right.
You understand?
Right.
So you see, the worst thing that can ever happen to your child is to think that they're suffering the worst. As long as you think it's not the worst, you can get through anything. When you think it's the worst, you can't go on, even if it's something like shoes. Right? You understand?
Yeah, but it's hard for them to think like that. Like, so you have like in certain communities in America, a 16-year-old boy has a driver's license and he doesn't have a car, and all his friends have cars. This is the worst life. I'm suffering, until he realizes,
other people don't have their driver's license.
They're not driver's license. People have they can't afford a car, whatever. And it's so many worse things than that. Like,
right, 100%.
He's got a bike, he's got a moped, he's got all these things, but
Right, so it doesn't matter where you are. You could be Prince Charles. You've listened to Prince Charles's life. When I was growing up, everyone wanted to be Prince Charles. Oh, what a charmed life, right? If you listen to his life, it's no charmed life.
Right.
He did not grow up with a charm, right? It's a very, very difficult life, right? Wow. No matter what situation you are, you can be the richest person on the planet. Your kids are still going to think that no one suffers worse than them.
Yeah.
Right? So you see, we'll take it a little deeper, right? Why is it so bad to think you suffer the worst? In other words, why is that debilitating? You don't have shoes, or you don't have a car, or all my friends have BMWs, and I got, I've got to put up with a Ford, right? So why is that, even though the incapacity, you've got everything you need, but it's the worst because they got a BMW and I got a Ford. So why is suffering the worst suffering? Because the worst suffering is to think that God hates you. That's the worst thing that you can feel, is that God hates me. How do I know God hates me? Because I'm suffering the worst. In other words, if there is a God, what's he going to throw at you? The worst thing he could possibly do. So in the child's perspective, the worst thing he could possibly do is then have shoes.
You can also say that God made a mistake by not giving me a BMW instead of a Ford. God made a mistake. I should have instead of God hates me, he just made a mistake.
Yes, but the emotion that goes with, that's underlying why am I suffering the worst is debilitating, is because it's really saying God hates me.
Right.
So if God hates me, then I can't do anything because God's always against me.
What about just saying not living with gratitude?
That's the opposite, the antithesis of that. That's
one thing happening is not living with gratitude, not being happy with what you have in your life.
That's the same thing, the opposite end. That's the positive side of this concept, right? But if you think that God hates me, and therefore the antidote for this is, right, I always say, right, what's the one thing that God doesn't do very well?
Communicate with us. Doesn't talk.
No, that's not true.
What's the answer to this?
The one thing that God doesn't do very well is second best.
That's good.
Trick question.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a trick question.
Yeah.
Right? That means if your life could get any better, it would be better.
Uh-huh.
Right? In other words, you go buy a lottery ticket, right, and you lose, it's because it's better for you. Now, which would you rather have? Win the lottery and ruin your life, or lose the lottery and make your life? Think about it for a minute.
I'd rather lose the lottery.
A lot of people would say no. Right? You follow? Right? So if you're happy that you won the lottery, you should be equally happy that you lost the lottery, because that's better for you than winning the lottery. So when you live like that, and you teach your children to live like that, yes, you don't have shoes at the moment. That's better for you. Right? If Steve Jobs was put up for adoption, right? And he says this. Steve Jobs' first parents, who his mother was pregnant, you should listen to it. It's a Stanford acceptance speech, graduation speech. Phenomenal. So he says in there, right? Essentially, if you take apart what he says in there, the people who were putting him up who were going to adopt him were rich lawyers, right? And at the last minute, when he was born, they said they wanted a girl.
Huh.
So he was rejected twice. They didn't know this at the time,
right,
but he found out about it, right? The people who adopted him were basically broke, like, struggling, right, people. No, good people, working class people, right, follow? And the mother would only, because she was a college grad, would only let these people adopt him if they promised to send him to college. They never went to college.
Yeah.
So he picked the most expensive college he could, because he didn't know any better. They didn't know any better. And it was breaking their bank.
Yeah.
And that's why he quit. Because he quit, he figured out computers. It's a long story, but that's because he quit. If his parents, the second set of parents, had not have rejected him, he would never have been Steve Jobs, because he went to college and they would just waste away his time like anybody else. Learn whatever it was. Right. He had to go through that process. So the best thing that could happen to him is to get rejected twice. If his mother kept him, if the second pair of parents had kept him, right, he would never have been Steve Jobs. And he says this. He says, when you connect the dots looking backwards, you realize that was the best thing that could have possibly happened to me.
Right.
Yeah. Amazing story.
Wow, we only have a few minutes left, but I have to ask you our favorite question.
Sure.
If you could have one message, let's say it's a billboard, that the world would see, what would your message be?
Oh, my goodness.
Very quick.
But,
short, I mean.
So I have a phrase, right? Life doesn't get any better than this.
Yep.
That's it.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I love it. Wow, there's so much more we have to explore. I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah. So how can people find you?
Stephen Baars, Stephen, on YouTube is the best way.
Stephen Baars.
Yeah. Or Google me.
Do you still have Bliss? Are you still doing that? Or you have a website for that or not?
Yes, getbliss.com is my website. Amazon. You can look at Amazon and get my books. 100%.
And again, what are the books called again?
I've got one called Bliss and one called Win.
Okay, with a few on the way or one on the way?
There's another one just published called The Hidden Books of the Mesilas Yesharim. That just came out. Yeah.
Highly recommend.
I'm really excited to read hopefully all of these soon.
Okay, fantastic.
And to highlight.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much,
you've been
guys.
amazing.
Yeah, thank you for watching this episode of the Living in Clarity podcast.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Living in Clarity podcast.
If you enjoy what you just heard, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment with any suggestions for future episodes.
We'll see you next time.